A really important content warning for this one. This episode is entirely about the subject of emotional abuse and touches on the subject of child abuse, descriptions of emotional abuse, references to anti-trans organisations and individuals, and one audio clip of Posie Parker. Please take that under advisement. No hard feelings if you don't want to listen to this one. Alright, on with the show!
The category is What the Trans Daughter.
Hey everyone, this is Michelle, and it's just me, because Ashley is moving house. She sent her best, and she'll be back next week when we do a proper episode on a whole bunch of things, and what a lot of things we're going to have to cover. We are going to be talking about some of the things that you sent in, about your experiences at work, like we mentioned on our last episode. But we're also going to be looking at, look at what's happened. The England and Wales Charities Commission has awarded the LGBT Alliance charity status because, why the fuck not at this point? Everything else is totally absurd, so why not? Many US state legislators are tabling and passing anti-trans kid bills that are monstrous in their scope, and there is a lot more stuff going on that we will cover next week. But today, I'm doing a solo episode all about emotional abuse. Yeah, I know. But I think this is an important one. And again, this comes with a content warning. Obviously, I'll be talking about abuse, mostly child abuse, and there will be a clip of Posie Parker talking at the end. If you don't have the spoons for this, no hard feelings. We'll see you next time. But this episode is not about leaving you bummed out, because there are things that you can do to help. And I'll be trying to make as many quippy remarks as I can, considering the subject matter, for what is going to be some clearly very uncomfortable tone changes. But there's also going to be some music to operate as some relief. Got the mighty Husk, who has provided 2 songs, including a collaboration with the non-binary drag artist Ragdoll, and also have one of my favourite DIY trans punkers out there, Alexandra Valentine, who's kindly come up with a whole new song just for us. So stay in for that. They're going to break things up a little bit, so it's a little bit easier to listen to. And maybe even get you to wiggle some of them body parts. But for now, let's get into this. The concepts of abuse, domestic abuse, and child abuse, as they are understood by the general population of the UK, are centred on physical and sexual abuse. The reasons are obvious. These forms of abuse are more eye-catching and the results are devastating. Emotional abuse can be just as devastating, partly because much of the time it is a more subtle form of abuse that is missed even by the person who is experiencing it. And that may be quite confusing to hear. Bear with me, I'll get to that in a bit. So the NSPCC, the National Society for the Protection of Cruelty to Children, defines emotional abuse as follows. Emotional abuse is any type of abuse that involves the continual emotional mistreatment of a child. It's sometimes called psychological abuse. Emotional abuse can involve deliberately trying to scare, humiliate, isolate, or ignore a child. Emotional abuse is often a part of other kinds of abuse, which means it can be difficult to spot the signs of or tell the difference, though it can also happen on its own. That's the NSPCC's words. Relate, a UK charity that offers relationship support for adults, outlines several behaviours that come under this label. This is just read straight from their website. I don't want to mince anybody's words or get anything of this wrong, so I'm just going to basically read out exactly what they said. Intimidation and threats. This could be things like shouting, acting aggressively, or just generally making you feel scared. This is often done as a way of making a person feel small and stopping them from standing up for themselves. Criticism. This could be things like name-calling or making lots of unpleasant or sarcastic comments. This can really lower a person's self-esteem and self-confidence. Undermining. This might include things like dismissing your opinion. It can also involve making you doubt your own opinion by acting as if you're being oversensitive if you do complain. Disputing your version of events, or by suddenly being really nice to you after being cruel. Being made to feel guilty. This can range from outright emotional blackmail, threats to kill oneself, or lots of emotional outbursts, to sulking all the time or giving you the silent treatment as a way of manipulating you. Economic abuse. This can be withholding money, not involving you in finances, or even preventing you from getting a job. This could be done as a way of stopping you from feeling independent and that you're able to make your own choices, telling you what you can and can't do. As the examples above make clear, emotional abuse is generally about control. Sometimes this is explicit. Does your partner tell you when and where you can go, or even stop you from seeing certain people? Do they try to control how you dress, or how you style your hair? So it's back to me now. These are my words now. I'm going to put links in the description for all of this stuff so you can read about it yourself, but Emotional abuse is regularly missed, diminished or willfully misunderstood by many. One reason may be because many fictional characters are portrayed as actively being emotionally abused, and this is almost always glossed over or otherwise sometimes even played for laughs. Jerry Gergich from Parks and Recreation is one example. Parks and Rec was a TV comedy in the States that was huge during the 2010s. Most of you will have heard of it. Most of you will have seen memes about the character of Ron Swanson, for example. But the character of Jerry was portrayed as the office punching bag. This was portrayed as a joke, the punchline being that Jerry was actually the nicest man in the world, and yet everyone in the office hated him for no obvious reason. They undermined him, they made him feel guilty, they criticised him endlessly, they didn't even remember what his actual name was, and regularly called him Gary, Barry, and everything else. And Jon Snow from Game of Thrones was another example. This guy was one of the most beloved characters on Game of Thrones and held a special place in the hearts of millions, but his parents emotionally abused him from day one. He was told 100 different ways that he is less than his brothers and sisters, and he was actively scapegoated by his mother his entire life. If you want to understand why the character of Jon Snow was so dour and depressed the whole time, it's because he was living with trauma. It needs to be said that Game of Thrones was awful when it came to depicting physical and sexual abuse, but emotional abuse is so widely misunderstood that I don't think the writers of the show even realised that Jon Snow was a survivor of a form of child abuse. But let's get into the specifics on that. Here are the behaviours that the NSPCC outline as examples of emotional abuse of a child. Humiliating or constantly criticising a child, threatening, shouting at a child or calling them names, making the child the subject of jokes or using sarcasm to hurt a child, blaming and scapegoating, making a child perform degrading acts, not recognising a child's own individuality or trying to control their lives, pushing a child too hard or not recognising their limitations, exposing a child to upsetting events or situations like domestic abuse or drug taking, failing to promote a child's social development, not allowing them to have friends, persistently ignoring them, being absent, manipulating the child, never saying anything kind, expressing positive feelings or congratulating a child on their successes, never showing any emotions in interactions with a child, also known as emotional neglect. These behaviours can be emotionally abusive, but to fully paint the picture, I think we're going to have to hear from someone who has survived this form of abuse. Thankfully, I don't have to go far. But before I talk about my own experiences, here is our first song for this episode. We have featured Husk before. Husk is amazing, we are big fans. And here is their Below the Neck. So that was Husk with Below the Neck, and there are links in the description for where you can find more of Husk's music, and we'll go into that a bit later on. But now it's time to talk to the person who's experienced emotional abuse directly. I mean, it's me. I don't know why I'm doing this thing, like trying to be coy about it, or trying to be, dramatic or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, let's just get on with this. So I'm a survivor of emotional abuse and grew up with 12 of the behaviours of the NSPCC specified from various members of my family most days of my youth and sporadically as an adult. The effect this has had on me varies from pretty bad to downright bizarre. I cannot use hairdryers, hand dryers or hoovers, and hearing them makes me feel anxious as well as angry. Starbucks genuinely makes me angry for reasons aside from being the absolute worst thing to happen to coffee since Richard Nixon drank some. I hate my birthday and will never ever celebrate Christmas ever again. I have mental health diagnoses of all sorts of things, and I'm probably in the market for a few more. Living in this situation does a number on you because it is death by 1,000 cuts. In my situation, it was very much the case that the feelings of others were more important than the needs I may have had that they didn't agree with. That is a convoluted sentence, but to break it down, my family had issues with regulating their emotions. So if someone did something that was interpreted as a slight or a sign of disrespect, that person would start screaming. There was also an element of children in my family being owned by their parents. There was no privacy and no autonomy. In my early 20s, I was attempting to grow out my hair. There was a family wedding, and I was an adult at this point, and a family member gaslighted me for 6 hours because they had decided that I was required to shave my head. They did not do this to any other person at any of this wedding. They used guilt, they used shame, they called me selfish because my hair, which wasn't even that bad, would ruin this wedding, I was told, over and over and over again. I shaved my head on the kitchen table in front of them at 2 a.m. We had to be up 4 hours later for the wedding. I was an adult and I didn't even have control over my own hair. This wasn't just strict parenting. I was an object that they owned, and if I didn't do exactly what they wanted, it was met with behaviours that I outlined earlier. This atmosphere meant that anxiety was a predetermined destination for me. I apologised for my existence wherever I went. At my core, I believed I was worthless. My childhood was filled with times I let my family down. But in therapy, I realised much later that my abusers buried that abuse deep in my brain by shaming me whilst they did it. So I remember the times that they did things to me as me doing things wrong. That's how they hid it. Here's an example. I was maybe 12 years old, and during this time, my family were arguing every night, screaming at each other, every day for weeks. I kept my head in my Game Boy Color most days. To this day, Nintendo makes me feel safe. There was a therapy session last year I was having where I was talking about this and realised there were 4 plastic Marios on my desk. Abuse is weird. One evening we were all supposed to go meet some family friends for a meal, and my family were at each other's throats, and I was sat feet away from them screaming at each other, and I was just staring at the ground. And suddenly I walked out the house. I didn't choose this. I just remember walking. I don't know where I went, and I don't know how I got back. I watched myself do this. I could see what this is now. After weeks of the screaming, years of living on eggshells in a situation where you were always seconds away from being emotionally attacked, I got the fuck out of there. When I got back, my family didn't ask me why I left. They rounded on me, called me selfish. They never asked why I did that. I know now what that was. I was in a dissociative state. And they were offsetting the blame and guilt from their own abhorrent behaviour onto me because I gave them a reason. I was the scapegoat. I existed to benefit them. And when I eventually came out as trans in my late 20s, they accepted me. But then they used that acceptance to gaslight and guilt me into doing whatever they wanted. One family member used my home as their own private hotel, showing up in the middle of the night with only a day's notice. If I didn't entertain them in London like they wanted, I was punished, I was selfish, I was awful. One wanted me to stay in the closet and keep being trans in London. When I expressed my needs, the message was if I defied them, I was being selfish because of what I was doing to them just by being trans. And I went along with it for a couple of years because they trained me to. They planted core ideas in my brain that I was selfish, an awful person who was a burden. Deep down, I felt like I was less than everyone else in any room I was in. I also had a side to me that was very combative, because at times I had to fight back to get my needs met. The effects of this have been lifelong and severe. If you're wondering why the podcast disappeared for months last year, this is why. This is what emotional abuse is. Just want to say, don't worry about me. I took steps last year to protect myself and I'm doing okay. I have support, I have a therapist. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be better than fine. I think I'm going to be the person that I should have been. But I tell you this, not to try and make this about me, but because I don't think people would understand it. Because I could read off all of the descriptions on any website in the world, but it's just not the same as hearing about what this actually is on the ground from a survivor's face. And honestly, I didn't want to ask anyone else to do it. I also tell you this because the truth is trans people are more likely to be abused in all its forms. I've spoken to some folks who work in the field about this and don't want to get bogged down in stats, but the results are in. Trans people, even before they come out to others, are more likely to have experienced sexual, physical and or emotional abuse. More likely than cis people. When I've asked these people why, for past episodes or recently, the answer has been the same. Abusers target those who are vulnerable, and trans people in the closet in a transphobic society are especially vulnerable. If you believe that you've been affected by the issues or situations I've presented, please click on the reference link in the description for a wide array of resources that will be able to help you. They've helped me, and there is help out there. But for now, that was the me section, and in the next part, I'm going to be painting out how this relates to the UK's 6 years long moral panic against trans rights, the rise of the UK's anti-trans movement, and what you can do about it. But for now, here is Alexandra Valentine's Back Up.
It's been so many years of the lies and the bullshit, a record that's been stuck on repeat. So many years that I wake in the morning, I'm feeling like I'm already beat. How much more of the fucking circus gone on too long, not even funny. I always get back up again, no matter how often I fall, and I will always get back up again, brush it off like it was nothing at all, spit in the face of my detractors just to see if they can feel anymore, and I will always get back up again, always.
That was Alexandra Valentine with Back Up, who put that together especially for this episode because she is a goddamn hero. Thank you so much, Alex, and please go to her Bandcamp, alexvalentine.bandcamp.com, and buy her album. It is very, very good. Do it. Do it now. So I've gone into what emotional abuse is and shared elements of my experiences of it. So what does this have to do with the anti-trans nightmare situation? Well, it was after I woke up to my situation last year that I started to see it. And it started when I was looking into rapid onset gender dysphoria. This is going to take some explaining. Before 2018, on anti-trans spaces online, including Mumsnet, various gender-critical subreddits that no longer exist, and other forums for nightmare garbage people, there was a common refrain. Parents of trans youths hypothesised that their child was not really trans. They would take the fact that the revelation that their kid was trans was a surprise to them, that the kid must be wrong and just pretending to be trans because it was cool. Because they got it off the internet, because they got it off their friends. They know their child better than the child does. No child ever keeps secrets from their parents. But in 2018, Brown researcher and actual devil Lisa Lippman probably decided to do a scientific study which involved placing a web survey on these anti-trans websites, the very same that perpetrated this absurd idea, and asked them if it was true. This scientific study was basically the same as going to a flat earth website and asking their readers if the earth was flat. And so rapid onset gender dysphoria, which I'll be referring to as ROGD, was legitimised in the sciencey sounding study, even though it was a fucking survey monkey. Now, here is where things get even weirder. ROGD at its core is coming from the opinions of those external to the trans kids themselves. It is literally invalidating their identity by suggesting they caught it off the internet. Lisa Lippman does not specify what internet means in that scenario. It could mean trans-inclusive websites, or it could be marathoning Say Yes to the Dress. I mean, who the hell knows? I couldn't unsee it when I've clocked onto this. ROGD is the perfect tool for an abuser to use against their child. And now Lisa Lippman had strengthened the gaslighting by adding so much more gas. The anti-trans nightmare garbage people embraced ROGD because it confirmed what they already believed, that being trans isn't a real thing, that it has to come from somewhere. The LGBT Alliance, Fair Play for Women, Transgender Trends, J.K. Rowling, the Safe Schools Alliance, the former comedy writer, and James Dreyfus, every anti-trans group or prominent thinker has pushed the idea of ROGD as being a real thing and a reason to effectively push for conversion therapy, or as they call it, alternative treatments for gender dysphoria. And it is in these spaces, and the spaces that are part of the wider anti-trans community, that ideas like ROGD are being used to justify abusive behaviour towards trans youths. And that's happening right now. I wrote a blog about it on our website. There'll be a link to it in the description. I encourage you to go read it if you have the spoons for it. I will not read out there what I have found. That's all on the blog. You can read it. But here's the rub. There are groups out there under the banner of ROGD parents who are saying the same things my family did about how they have ownership over their child's identities. And they use it to justify invalidating them. They use this to justify criticising their kids. They say that their child has been taken away from them by the trans cult, or they're taken away from them by some other force. They say how hard it is on them to see their child become trans. How hard it is on them. Always how hard it is on them. Their kids' needs be damned. These online spaces are packed with justifications and even advice on how to emotionally abuse their trans children out of being trans. This is out there right now. So many of these orgs and people's output in the media and through their own channels is at least justifying it, and at worst openly advocating for it. If you do not believe me, here is the inventor of the adult human female anti-trans campaign and all-round anti-trans nightmare of the highest order, Posie Parker, who is making a comparison between more manipulative forms of emotional abuse and outright overt forms of emotional abuse.
Whereas I grew up in quite a shitey household where everything was completely out in the open. If my mother or father were annoyed with me, I knew about it. There was no subversive, weird, horrible, subliminal disappointment. It was just outward. You've done this. I don't like it. I don't want you to do it again. Or probably not as nice in those terms. But I just feel because my parents stuff, like if they shouted at me, I could think that they were horrible for shouting at me, right? And they probably would think they were horrible for shouting at me, or that it was a terrible thing to do to shout, or that everybody had lost their temper. But it was a really honest interaction where everybody was perfectly clear about where they were. And I know there are people that say that shouting is wrong, but actually I think shouting and being angry and telling someone how you feel about something is far, far better than disappointment and stuff all under the radar. That's my welcome to psychology, aka my psychology, which probably isn't psychology at all, and is some sort of bogus working class common sense.
The second behaviour the NSPCC outline as emotionally abusive is as follows: threatening, shouting at a child, or calling them names. Personally, I can assure you, Posie, there is nothing good and honest about screaming and name-calling a child. I want to thank Mallory for sending me this clip. It literally came out today. It's such an astonishing coincidence. And, I mean, she couldn't have put it better herself if she tried. And I don't think she tries that hard on a fucking YouTube channel. So, listener, why am I telling you all this? I know things are rough right now. Why in my right mind would I choose now to tell you this? Because you can do something about it. If you are listening and you believe you are in danger, you can get help. I'll be providing information on the reference sheet that will provide guidance on how you can keep yourself safe. I tell you this because now you know what to look for in your life and in the lives of people around you. And if you know all the signs, then you'll be able to see them. We have to look after ourselves. And there are people out there who can help. We have to get wise to this. Trans kids are often not thought about by trans adults because the vast majority of trans kids will have cisgender parents. We don't see them. We don't know them. We bump into them at trans prides when we could have those. Now they're just invisible. They're not a thing that comes up when people see transphobia in society operate. But we can do something about this. It's horrible, it's depressing, it's nightmarish, but the truth is, if we can understand what emotional abuse is, in spite of how society itself doesn't seem to understand it, we can help those who are suffering in our community. So I think the thing to take away from this is that I'm portraying this and putting this out here there because I think this is a clear and present danger for the trans community that is not necessarily thought about as much, and this is kind of how it works. I can foresee a scenario where a parent has just been come out to by their trans kid. They go online, they do some Googling, they end up reading Jessie Single, they end up reading about J.K. Rowling, they end up reading about some stuff that the LGBT Alliance has been up to, they have been reading about what Fair Play for Women have been up to, and then they go down the rabbit hole and they go on those spaces, and suddenly they are being radicalised and being taught all of the tools to abuse their kids. I believe that is happening right now, and the evidence is right there on all of these web spaces. I genuinely believe that, so please check out the references in the description. But for now, that's it. I did it! I got through the script! Huzzah! And fuck me, do I need to fucking boogie. Thankfully, Husk sent me another song to play. This time they have collaborated with non-binary drag artist Ragdoll. Here is Husk and Ragdoll's Throwback.
Bringing pops and cross the lights. You ready? Your attention is on mine. Throw it back, throw it back, throw it back, throw it back, throw it back. Are you ready to throw it back for me? Throw it back, throw it back, back. Yes, throwing it back. Giving it the retro Willie attack. That's Smith, not the Western. Sticking them stacks, spitting them hits. That's back to back. No time for riff-raff, they're missing the axe. They getting hip to just keep sticking the apps. Living close by, not on the same graph. Missing the mark with the yickety yap. I'm talking Miami jump off, figure the brat, left eye, and the Snoop Dogg, Salt and Pepper, Jay and Nas, Cuban Lauren entertain the mass. X Club on TVA, Spice Girls wanna turn me gay. Then the steps always come to slay. TLC didn't come to play. Throw it back to good old time. Bringing back all the pumped up fight. Bringing pops and cross the line. Your attention is on mine. Your attention is on mine. Your attention is on mine. Moving, shaking, dropping time. Hold my clique now, fall in line. Your attention is on mine. Your attention is on mine. Moving, shaking, dropping time. Hold my clique now, fall in line. I'm in drag and yes I get bags. I be upstanding, you see no tags. Hitting the snags, 7 high class wags, that's Cheryl Tweedy, what are you looking for? The party's here, sweetie. You wanna talk about throwback Thursday? For me it's throwback Monday to Sunday. Promise I'll pay, I want everything fabulous. Playing all the 90s and noughties, it's glamorous. Whitney and Mariah do the thing, pop, pop. And I get clamorous, your attention is on mine, top everything. Women, don't you hit the ring, Kim's gonna win. Everything better from back in the day. How many you remember when Paris came to slay? Don't remember TV static, how are you gonna know how much cash is in your attic? My parents are aliens, manic. Steve Irwin, Australian magic. Cramp twins are sailing as panic. I think I proved the point, now he's not, he's climactic. Got a Husk on the track so you know I bring the fun in. Below the neck, we high functioning. Throw it back to the good old times. Bringing back all the pumped up vibes. Bringing pops and cross the lines. Your attention is on mine. Throw it back, throw it back, throw it back, throw it back. Your attention is on mine. Your attention is on mine. Moving, shaking, dropping time. Hold my clique now, fall in line. Your attention is on mine. Your attention is on mine. Moving, shaking, dropping time. Hold my clique now, fall in line. Throw it back to the good old times. Bringing back all the pumped up vibes. Bringing pops and cross the line. Your attention is on mine.
Gotta say, that's a banger. So that was Husk doing the singing, with Ragdolls being the writers. You can get your hands on that yourselves when it is released on the 7th of May. There is a link in the description to the pre-save. So you click the link, it'll pre-save it on whatever music app you happen to use. But you can also check out Husk's Bandcamp, husknoise.bandcamp.com. Please go buy their work. They are great. They gave me 2 songs to use for free. And I would very much like a few Bandcamp purchases to happen as a result. And that's the pod. We're back next week with a proper episode with me and Ashley. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of things. We're also going to talk to activists. We're going to talk to the Trans Safety Network, and we are talking to a mysterious person who has been putting stickers up all over Cardiff. Check that out next week. But for now, you can check us out on socials, twitter.com/whatthetrans, facebook.com/whatthetrans. You can also check out our website, whatthetrans.com, where that blog is, and there's a link in the description for that. But for now, thank you very much for listening to my solo rant, and have a good weekend. Bye bye. This episode of What the Trans was done entirely by me, Michelle Snow, and I would like to really thank our Patreon level producers, Nick Ross, Alice Chalkley, Jasmine, Sim, Melody Nix, Fiona Punctured, John, Lynn McKay, Nick Duffy, CB Bailey, Gordon Cameron, Peter Kimball, Rachel T.S., Connie Turner, Wen Witherop, Vic Parsons, Joel Lewis, Tila Wild, Atom James, Vanessa Billington, Tower Watch, Rowan Littlejohns, Desiree Markland, Samantha Raven, Patreon user, Derek Victor, Sarah Bedford of Dog Halliwell, Emma Doyle, Mike Dickinson, Owen Willis, Catherine, Mina, Elliot McVeigh, Cassius Adair, Tuck, Melissa Brooks, Ian Coomber, Maddie Bell, Karakin12, April Heller, Sophie Lewis, Alexandra Lilly, Claire Scott, Ariadne Pena, Lauren O'Nions, Mara Reynolds, Berners Pink Jellybean, and Lainos. Thank you very much for listening. Have a good weekend.